All right, today we're going to be talking about Chapter 5 of the McKinley text for tissue organization. So right off the bat, we will talk about tissues. Histology is the study of tissues. And in this case, we're talking about tissues being groups of similar cells and extracellular material, and they all share a common function if they're part of a specific tissue, of course. And for example, providing protection is a very common one. There are 4 types of tissues that we're going to be talking about: epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. And they all have varied structure and function. So what you should be able to do after this section is to describe the common features of epithelial tissue, explain the 4 functions of epithelial tissues, name the classes of epithelia based on cell layers and cell shapes, and give examples of each type of epithelium. You should be able to define the glands, distinguish between endocrine and exocrine glands, and list exocrine gland types based on both anatomic form and physiologic method of secretion. So start with epithelium, also referred to as the epithelial tissue. It's composed of one or more layers of closely packed cells. There's little to no extracellular matrix. It covers the body surfaces. It lines your body cavities. It forms the majority of glands. As far as cellularity, it's composed almost entirely of tightly packed cells. Polarity, it's an apical surface which is exposed to the external environment or the internal body space. And it has microvilli or cilia. And there's a lateral surface with intercellular junctions and a basal surface with the epithelium attached to connective tissue. I'll show a picture of this in a moment here. Its attachment to a basement membrane, where there's a barrier between the epithelium and the connective tissue. Avascularity is with the epithelial lacks blood vessels. Nutrients are obtained across the apical surface or from basal surface. It has extensive innervation. It's richly innervated. It detects changes in the environment. And it has a high regeneration capacity with continual replacement of lost cells at the epithelial layer. So here we have the epithelium, the apical surface here, the free surface, the lateral surface, the basal surface, then there's the basement membrane here to the connective tissue, and of course a blood vessel or connective tissue. As far as functions of epithelial tissue, it provides protection, prevents or protects from dehydration or abrasion or destruction. It has selective permeability. It allows passage of some substances while preventing passage of others. Secretion, some cells are specialized to secrete. We'll talk about that. Sensation, some supply information to the nervous system. As far as classification, it's based on a number of cell layers and different types of cells as well, which we'll talk about and show you a graphic of that shortly here. Simple epithelium, it's one cell layer thick. All cells contact the basement membrane for filtration, absorption, or secretion, where that's the primary function. Stratified epithelium, 2 or more layers of epithelial cells. There's only a basal layer in contact with the basement membrane and area subjected to mechanical stress. Pseudostratified epithelium appears layered. All cells contact the basement membrane but may not reach the apical surface. Classification by shape, we have the squamous or squamous cells. They're flat, they're wide, irregular in shape, looks like a fried egg, very thin. Their nucleus is flat. Cuboidal cells, where you're going to find these cells where you need some structure or your cells need to make something. They're about as tall as they are wide. They look like cubes. The nucleus is spherical and in the center of the cell. The columnar cells, they have to make a lot of stuff. So they're going to be sized, maybe a little bigger still. They're slender and taller than they are wide. They're thicker. We're getting thicker cells here. They give more protection. The nucleus is oval and oriented lengthwise in a basal region. And then you have these transitional cells that are very stratified. There are many shapes. They change their shape depending on the stretch of the epithelium, and they're between types of epithelia. So we have our classification of epithelia. We have our simple epithelium here, the apical surface again here, the lateral surface. There's the basement membrane with the basal surface right between the lateral surface and the basement membrane. The nucleus of a squamous cell here is more flat, like a fried egg. And we have the nucleus of the cuboidal cell looking very cube-like, and the nucleus of the columnar cell inside this columnar cell here looking like a column, right? Nucleus here, to make sure I was clear, the whole thing's not the nucleus, but just the components with a cell around it. Then as far as breaking down the types of epithelia, we have our simple epithelium and our stratified epithelium. And really it could actually classify as transitional as its own little thing. It shouldn't necessarily be part of stratified per se, but that said, it's classified that way here. For simple epithelium, there was just one layer of cells. You have a simple squamous, one layer of flattened cells, simple cuboidal, one layer of cells about as tall as they are wide, simple columnar that are one layer of tall, narrow cells, the pseudostratified columnar, which are one layer of tall cells that appear stratified. They appear stratified, they're not, it's just one layer. Then we have for our stratified epithelium, but they're stacked, right? Stratified, stacked. providing a greater thickness. There's multiple layers of stratified squamous with upper layers of flattened cells. Stratified cuboidal, there's 2 or more layers. Cells are about as tall as they're wide. Stratified columnar, again, two or more layers of tall, narrow cells. And transitional, where again we have multiple layers of cells that change shape when they're stretched. Okay? And as far as stratified squamous, we also have keratinized, where the superficial cells are dead, and non-keratinized, where the superficial cells are living. So we can see a little picture here, the simple squamous, very flat-like, right? Cuboidal, looking more like cubes and a little thicker, and the columnar even thicker still, okay? Simple columnar epithelium. Then we have our stratified squamous epithelium, where we have these squamous cells, but they're stacked. And we have the stratified cuboidal epithelium. Cuboidal, like this, simple would be just one layer, and stratified would be multiple layers. I have a pseudostratified columnar epithelium called pseudostratified because it's not really multiple layers, but it is thicker and longer because of the way they're configured here. It gives the appearance of having more than one layer. And then, of course, you have stratified columnar as well. As far as simple squamous goes, for simple squamous epithelium, or the simple squamous cells, they're a single layer of flat cells, and they're spherical to the oval nucleus. They're the thinnest of the barriers. They allow rapid movement of molecules across the surface. Good examples are the lining, the air sacs of the lungs, the alveoli, the vessel walls, endothelium, and the serous membranes like the mesothelium. Okay. The simple cuboidal epithelium, single layer, again, simple. Have these uniformly shaped cubes here. They're about as tall as they're wide. They're centrally located, spherical nucleus, and designed for absorption and secretion, and they're ideal for structural components of glands. The simple columnar epithelium, still a single layer of cells, but they're taller than they're wide, with an oval nucleus, and they're ideal for secretory and absorptive functions, and their 2 forms are non-ciliated and ciliated. And with the non-ciliated simple columnar epithelium, they contain microvilli, the fuzzy structure or brush border, and there's unicellular glands that are the goblet cells, which I'm sure you've heard before. They secrete glycoproteins like mucin, and they form mucus when mixed with water. It lines the most digestive tract from the stomach to the anal canal. Okay. And the ciliated simple columnar epithelium, cilia project from the apical surface, okay, the apical surface here. They move mucus along, and the goblet cells are interspersed. They line the bronchioles and the uterine tubes, helping them move the oocyte away from the ovary to the uterus for the uterine tubes. And the pseudostratified columnar epithelium appears as multiple cell layers. They're not really stratified, once again. The 2 forms are ciliated and non-ciliated for pseudostratified. And for ciliated pseudostratified columnar epithelium, the cilia, again, is on the apical surface. They have protective functions. The goblet cells secrete mucin. It traps foreign particles moved by the cilia. And they're located in large passageways of the respiratory system, okay, helping to grab bacteria, among other things, and to separate out what you don't want. The non-ciliated pseudostratified columnar epithelium, it's rare. It lacks cilia and goblet cells, has protective functions. It occurs mainly in the male urethra and epididymis. As far as the stratified squamous epithelium, there are multiple cell layers stratified, only deepest in direct contact with the basement membrane. The basal layers have the cuboidal shape, and the apical cells with the squamous shape. Near the surface, understandably, it's going to be thinner, right? And as you go deeper down, it's going to be more cuboidal, thicker. Protects against abrasion and friction. Stem cells in the basal layer are continuously dividing. They replace lost cells at the surface, so you can slough off. A lot of times that squamous type layer, you'll be able to see the ability, like skin, to be able to slough off and be replaced. But you need to be something a little thicker in that case, not just to be completely thin. Otherwise, you'd scrape it off and be gone. It exists, particularly in the keratinized and non-keratinized forms. So in the keratinized forms, the superficial layers of dead cells, the cells lack nuclei, they're filled with keratin. And the cells in the basal region migrate toward the apical surface, okay? And they fill with keratin and die, and they're found in the epidermis of the skin, right? As we talk about the sloughing off and be able to, ideally, the thin layer, you're going to slough it off, it's just going to be dead skin and sloughing off, right? That said, non-keratinized, all cells are alive, and need to be kept moist with secretion, typically more towards internal structures, not just outer layer of the skin, like the keratinized, stratified squamous epithelium. They lack keratin, and they protective proteins. They're microscopically visible through cell nuclei. They're lining the oral cavity, part of the pharynx, esophagus, vagina, and anus. Okay. And stratified cuboidal epithelium, there's two or more layers, stratified, right? Superficial cells are cuboidal. They form tubes and coverings, a lot of times in these cases here, for protection, secretion, like the walls of ducts and most of the exocrine glands, sweat glands, part of the male urethra, and the periphery of ovarian follicles. Now, stratified columnar, those are rare. There are two more layers of cells. They protect and secrete, found in the large ducts of the salivary glands and part of the male urethra. Okay. As far as the transitional epithelium goes, it's limited to the urinary tract, essentially. In a relaxed state, the basal cells, cuboidal or polyhedral, the apical cells are large and they're rounded. In the stretched state, apical cells flatten out, which makes sense, right? Something thicker, you stretch it out, it's going to flatten out. And of course, it has binucleated cells with two nuclei, and it allows for stretching as a bladder fills. Some happen to see there as the bladder fills. As far as the transitional epithelium goes, you see where it's relaxed and distended, right? Where it's relaxed and where it's distended, where it's going to flatten out. As far as glands, glands are individual cells or multicellular organs composed of epithelial tissue. They're endocrine or they're exocrine. We often talk more about endocrine, but we also have exocrine. Endocrine glands lack ducts. They secrete hormones into the blood, right? Exocrine glands are invaginated epithelium in the connective tissue. They're connected with epithelial surface by ducts, and like the sweat glands, mammary glands, and salivary glands. Unicellular exocrine glands, they don't contain a duct. They're located close to the epithelium surface. The most common type is a goblet cell. Okay? And the multicellular exocrine glands are numerous cells, acini cell clusters that produce secretions, and ducts transport secretions to epithelial surface. They're surrounded by a fibrous capsule, and the extension of this capsule are the septa, the partition gland, and the lobes. So you can see our exocrine gland here with the duct and the lobe here, okay? And the acinus, where the secretory portion is, and the duct, the conducting portion, okay? Much larger image of what essentially is right in there. As far as the glands go, we have the simple glands with a single unbranched duct, compound with branched ducts, tubular glands with secretory portion and the duct of the same diameter. Acinar glands, which are secretory portion, forms expanding a sac with an expanded sac, and tubulo-acinar gland, both tubules and acini. So we have our simple tubular, simple branched, simple coiled, simple acinar, and simple branched for the simple glands. Then we have for the compound glands, you can see much greater branch-like structures here. We have our compound tubular, compound acinar, and compound tubulo-acinar. As far as the exocrine glands go, they are the americrine. They package secretions into vesicles. They're released by exocytosis, like lacrimal, like tear, and salivary glands. Apicrine glands have the apical membrane pinches off and becomes secretion like mammary and ceruminous glands. And our holocrine glands that are ruptured cells have what becomes a secretion, I should say, with the sebaceous like oil glands. Okay. And of course, we see the mesocrine gland and versus the apicrine gland and the holocrine gland, and with cells dividing here, and showing the secretions coming out through here, and just a slightly different shape here based upon their slightly variable functions here and locations. Seeing more here with the jaw and the ear. I should not say I'm starting with the ear, but the jaw here for the salivary glands, and the mammary gland versus sebaceous gland here for the holocrine gland. So you should be able to answer then, why does an epithelium need to be highly regenerative? Why is an epithelium considered selectively permeable? How does simple epithelium differ from stratified epithelium? What type of epithelial tissue lines the air sacs of the lungs? What epithelial tissue contains multiple layers of cells, and the most superficial cells are squamous, dead, and filled with protein keratin? What are the two basic parts of a multicellular exocrine gland? And what are the differences between holocrine and mesocrine glands? And that's section 5.1. We'll come back for section 5.2.